The courtroom was silent, too silent. The air was thick with tension as Judge William Carter leaned forward, his piercing blue eyes burning into young black lawyers standing before him. "Mr. Andrews," the judge drawled, his voice soaked in condescension. "Are you sure you belong in this courtroom? Because from where I'm sitting you seem out of place." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Malcolm Andrews tightened his grip on his briefcase, his jaw clenching. He had expected this. He had prepared for it. But nothing could have steeled him for the sheer audacity of this man. "I assure you, Your Honor," Malcolm said, his voice steady despite the rage bubbling inside him, "I belong here just as much as anyone else." Judge Carter scoffed. "We'll see about that." He turned to the opposing attorney, a smug-looking man in an expensive suit. "Mr. Hamilton, you may proceed." As the case unfolded, Malcolm presented his arguments with precision and eloquence. Every point was airtight, backed by solid evidence and legal precedents. But Judge Carter barely let him speak, constantly cutting him off, sustaining every objection against him, and dismissing his arguments with thinly veiled disdain. The final blow came when Malcolm attempted to present a crucial piece of evidence. "Objection!" Hamilton shouted. "Irrelevant." "Sustained," Judge Carter said without hesitation. "Your Honor, this directly pertains to—" Malcolm tried to argue. "I said sustained." The judge barked, glaring down at him. "Or do you have trouble understanding simple courtroom procedure?" A quiet, disbelieving gasp spread across the room. Malcolm felt the heat rise in his face, but he refused to lose his composure. He simply nodded and sat down, though his fists were clenched under the table. As the trial wrapped up, it was clear Malcolm's client had been railroaded. The jury had seen the bias, but under Judge Carter's thumb, the ruling was inevitable. Malcolm lost the case, but he didn't lose sight of his goal. That night, he sat alone in his office, staring at his law degree. His mother's words echoed in his head. "They will try to break you, son, but you are stronger than their hate." He refused to let this be the end of his story. Years passed. Malcolm worked tirelessly, taking on cases that no one else would. He fought for the voiceless, the marginalized, the people who had been steamrolled by a system that never gave them a chance. And one day, his relentless pursuit of justice paid off. Malcolm Andrews was appointed as a judge. The day he walked into the very same courtroom that had once humiliated him, the irony was not lost on him. His robe felt heavy with purpose, his gavel firm in his hand. But nothing could prepare him for the moment when the doors opened and a familiar, weary-looking man was led in. Judge William Carter, now disgraced and stripped of his title. Carter stood before the bench as a defendant, accused of corruption, bribery, and a list of unethical practices a mile long. He looked nothing like the powerful man who once belittled Malcolm. For the first time in his life, Carter was powerless. Malcolm leaned forward, mirroring the exact posture Carter had used against him all those years ago. The room was silent, waiting, anticipating. And then Malcolm spoke. Well, he said, his voice smooth and deliberate. "Mr. Carter, are you sure you belong in this courtroom?" The color drained from Carter's face. He swallowed hard, his lips trembling, but he said nothing. He had no power here anymore. Malcolm smiled, but there was no malice in it, only justice. The courtroom held its breath, waiting for the hammer to drop, waiting for the final poetic blow that would seal Carter's fate. And then Malcolm leaned back in his chair and said the words that would change everything. The courtroom held its breath, waiting for the hammer to drop, waiting for the final poetic blow that would seal Carter's fate. And then Malcolm leaned back in his chair and said the words that would change everything. "You are charged with multiple counts of judicial misconduct, bribery, and obstruction of justice. How do you plead?" Carter's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. The arrogance, the disdain, everything that had once made him untouchable was gone. In its place was a man cornered, stripped of his power. He glanced around the room, but there was no one left to shield him. The very system he had manipulated had now turned against him. Malcolm watched, unmoved. He had spent years dreaming of this moment, of the day the man who once belittled him would stand in the very spot he had condemned so many others. But now, With Carter standing before him as nothing more than a disgraced defendant, Malcolm felt something unexpected. Pity. I plead not guilty, Carter finally stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Malcolm nodded, unfazed. Very well. We will proceed with the preliminary hearings. But let me remind you, Mr. Carter, he said, letting the weight of his words settle over the room. Justice has a way of balancing the scales, no matter how long it takes. Carter flinched, and for the first time, it seemed he truly understood the gravity of his situation. The prosecution presented its case, detailing years of corruption under Carter's rule. Lawyers who bribed him for favorable rulings. Defendants whose cases were dismissed based on backroom deals. Each revelation painted a damning picture. The evidence was overwhelming. Malcolm listened intently, his face unreadable, but inside he felt the weight of history pressing down on him. Then, something unexpected happened. Carter's defense attorney stood, an older man with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor. Your Honor, before we proceed any further, my client has something he wishes to say. Malcolm raised an eyebrow. Proceed. Carter hesitated, then stood, gripping the edge of the table as if the weight of his sins made it hard to stand. He turned his gaze to Malcolm, and for the first time there was no contempt, only desperation. I know I've done wrong, he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. I abuse my power. I hurt people, and I will accept whatever punishment the court deems necessary. But, Your Honor, he paused, licking his dry lips, there is something you don't know, something bigger than me. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Malcolm narrowed his eyes. Explain. Carter took a deep breath. I wasn't acting alone. Silence. Thick, suffocating silence. Malcolm's fingers tightened around his gavel. Who else was involved? Carter's gaze darted around the room, as if afraid to say it out loud. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, There are judges, attorneys, and even high-ranking officials. They made me do things I never wanted to do. If I talk, I'm a dead man. A chill ran down Malcolm's spine. He had suspected Carter was corrupt, but this was something else entirely, a conspiracy embedded deep within the justice system. Malcolm leaned forward, his heart pounding. If what you're saying is true, you need to tell the court everything. Carter hesitated. Beads of sweat formed on his forehead. I need protection. If I testify, they'll come for me. Malcolm studied him, weighing his options. He had no doubt that Carter was telling the truth. But was this a ploy to escape justice? Or was he truly ready to bring down a system that had protected him for years? Before Malcolm could respond, a loud noise shattered the tension. The doors of the courtroom burst open, and a group of men in dark suits stormed in. The crowd gasped, shifting uncomfortably. One of the men stepped forward. Judge Andrews, we need to speak with you. Now! Malcolm recognized the insignia on the man's badge. Federal agents. Carter went pale. It's them, he whispered. They know I'm talking. Malcolm stood, his expression unreadable. Court is in recess, he declared, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. He turned to the agents. Step into my chambers. As he walked past Carter, the former judge grabbed his sleeve. His eyes, once filled with arrogance, now held nothing but fear. Please, he whispered, if you don't help me, they'll kill me before I ever see a trial. Malcolm stared at him, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He had waited years for justice, but now he realized the fight was far from over. As he stepped into his chambers, the door closing behind him, he had no idea that what the agents were about to say would change everything. As he stepped into his chambers, the door closing behind him, he had no idea that what the agents were about to say would change everything. Malcolm sat behind his desk, his eyes locked onto the lead agent. What is this about? The agent, a tall man with sharp jawline and cold gray eyes, set a thick folder on the desk. Judge Andrews, we've been investigating judicial corruption for years. Carter's name has come up multiple times, but we've never had enough to take down the bigger players. If he's ready to talk, we need to move fast. Malcolm leaned back, his fingers tapping against the wooden surface. He says his life is in danger. Do you believe him? The agent sighed. We don't just believe him, we know he's right. He opened the folder, revealing surveillance photos, financial transactions, and classified documents. There's a powerful network at play. High-ranking officials, judges, even law enforcement. Carter was just a pawn, but now that he's willing to flip, they'll do everything to silence him. Malcolm scanned the files, his stomach twisting. If this was true, the corruption ran deeper than he had ever imagined. What do you need from me? The agent didn't hesitate. Grant him protective custody. If we can keep him alive long enough to testify, we can finally expose the whole operation. Malcolm exhaled slowly. This was no longer just about Carter. This was about justice, the kind of justice he had sworn to uphold. But before he could respond, a loud explosion rocked the courthouse. The windows rattled, and shouts erupted from outside. Malcolm shot to his feet. What the hell was that? The agent's radio crackled. There's been a security breach. Multiple assailants, heavy fire. The transmission cut off. Malcolm's pulse pounded in his ears. He rushed to the door, but the agent grabbed his arm. Stay here. They could be coming for Carter. But Malcolm had spent his whole life fighting battles that others told him to walk away from. He yanked his arm free and bolted out of the room. The courthouse was in chaos. Armed men in masks were storming the halls, gunning down security officers. Malcolm's breath caught as he spotted Carter being dragged away by two men in black suits. Stop! Malcolm shouted, running toward them. One of the men turned, pulling a gun. Malcolm dove behind a bench as gunfire erupted, bullets splintering the wood. He clenched his jaw. He had come too far to let Carter be taken now. From the corner of his eye, he saw the federal agents return fire, forcing the masked men to retreat down a corridor with Carter still in their grip. Without thinking, Malcolm sprinted after them. His robe billowed behind him as he pushed through the smoke-filled hallway. He burst through the stairwell door just in time to see the assailants shoving Carter into an unmarked van. Malcolm knew he had seconds to act. He grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall and hurled it with all his strength. It smashed into the driver's side window, shattering glass everywhere. The driver jerked, momentarily stunned, and Carter took his chance. He threw his elbow back into the man, holding him, and scrambled toward Malcolm. Run! Malcolm shouted, grabbing Carter's arm and pulling him toward the emergency exit. Gunshots rang out behind them, but they didn't stop running. They burst into an alleyway, panting. Sirens wailed in the distance, but the danger wasn't over. The men chasing them wouldn't stop until Carter was dead. Carter doubled over, coughing. I told you, he wheezed. They'd rather kill me than let me talk. Malcolm looked around, his mind racing. We need to get you somewhere safe. Now. Before he could move, a black SUV screeched to a halt at the alley's entrance. The door swung open, and a man in an expensive suit stepped out. He was tall, well-groomed, and radiated power. He adjusted his gold cufflinks before meeting Malcolm's gaze with a smirk. Judge Andrews, he said smoothly. You've been causing quite a problem. Malcolm felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This wasn't just some hired gun. This was someone with real power. Someone who had been operating in the shadows for years. Carter took a shaky step back. That's him, he whispered. He's the one pulling the strings. Malcolm's blood ran cold. He had fought for justice his whole life, but this was bigger than anything he had faced before. The man in the suit pulled out a silencer-equipped pistol and aimed it directly at Carter's head. This ends now. Malcolm lunged forward, but before he could reach Carter, a gunshot echoed through the alleyway. Malcolm's heart stopped. For a split second, he thought Carter had been hit, but then the man in the suit staggered backward, his gun slipping from his hand as a crimson stain bloomed across his chest. He clutched the wound, his eyes wide in shock, before collapsing to the ground. Behind him, one of the federal agents stood, his smoking gun still raised. Hands where I can see them, the agent barked as more officers swarmed the alleyway, pinning the remaining masked assailants to ground. Carter gasped, pressing his hands against his knees. I thought I was dead, he choked out. Malcolm exhaled, his body still tense. So did I. The lead agent walked up to the dying man in the suit and crouched beside him. "You thought you could bury the truth forever," he said coldly. "But justice always catches up." The man tried to speak, but blood bubbled at his lips. His time was up. Within minutes, Carter was escorted into protective custody. The remaining members of the corruption ring were arrested in a coordinated federal raid. The story made national headlines. Massive judicial corruption exposed. Former judge testifies against crime syndicate. And most importantly, Judge Malcolm Andrews leads a historic takedown of corrupt officials. Months later, Malcolm sat behind his desk, his hands resting on the polished wood. But this time, he wasn't just a judge. He was a Chief Justice of the state Supreme Court. The courtroom was packed as he presided over his first major case, one that would set a precedent for fairness, equality, and accountability in the justice system. As he banged the gavel, signaling the start of the trial, he glanced at the empty chair where Carter once sat, a man once corrupt, but who had made a choice to do the right thing when it mattered most. The cycle had been broken. Justice had prevailed. And the system, once plagued with corruption, was finally in the hands of someone who would never abuse its power. And so, in the end, the arrogant judge who disrespected the black lawyer lived just long enough to regret it, because that black lawyer had now become the new judge. Judge disrespects black lawyer, regrets it when he becomes a new judge. Want more powerful stories like this? Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Let us know your thoughts below. Was justice served? Would you have handled it differently? We'll see you in the next one.